Hi, welcome back. It's Rachel, and I'm glad you could join me for another book chat. So, this week we're going to talk about graphic memoirs. And if you watched the book talk that I had on books and verse, you'll remember that I discussed the distinction between a memoir and a biography and autobiography. And I was using Jacqueline Woodson's lovely memoir, Brown Girl Dreaming. So the difference is that an autobiography or biography, definitely nonfiction, is going to discuss an entire individual's life. So when they were born until when they died, or up to the point where they're still living. Sorry if you're still living and you have an autobiography. And so it's going to try to capture everything that's going on in that individual's life. A memoir is different. What it's doing instead is it's going to reflect or focus on a particular event or a particular experience that somebody is going through. And a memoir is typically going to be written by an individual. It's not usually something that is done by another person, but we're going to see in one of our books where that is a little bit different. And the graphic memoirs I'm showing you are certainly going to be books that are focusing on a particular event in different individuals' lives that had a huge impact on who they are. And the format that is chosen to express itself is graphic. I know some people call it comics. I know my husband jokes because he says, like, we just called them comic books and now it's like graphic novels or graphic this. And clearly these aren't novels because they are nonfiction. But be it as it may, we have lots of different terminology for things that are presented in art format. So today I'm going to show you three different ones, and they cover a wide range of ages. I am a middle-aged person, and I enjoyed all three of them. So I'm going to start with the one that's for a younger age set. It's perfectly acceptable for individuals who are in what we would call middle school, but also I think individuals that are in high school and older would really, really respond to it. So it's won lots of accolades and awards. And so the first one I'm going to talk about is written by a very well-known individual, George Takei. Yes, Star Trek fame amongst other things. And it's called They Called Us Enemy. Anything that's graphic is usually not done in isolation. It's very rare that somebody is going to be able to not just produce the words, but also the art and the lettering and the coloring that might go along with it. And that is the case here. So I would like to also go ahead and give credit to Eisinger, Scott, and Becker, who were part of the team that helped to create this magnificent piece. And I also just want to show the back because I think it's so telling with this book. And I'm just going to cover my face. So this is George's family. And I love how it takes the symbol here. And of course, you can see it's red, white, and blue, and you have the stars and stripes, but it's also done in the style of the Japanese flag, for those of you who are familiar. And so what George Takei is writing about here is a moment in his life when he was very young in which World War II happened. In which World War II came to the United States in the form of Pearl Harbor. And so They Called Us Enemy. If you just look at the cover, and this is what I also really love about the graphic format, is you really do have to examine not just the words, but also just the pictures because it reveals so much. But what this does is it talks about the American concentration camps, for lack of a better word, in which 120,000 Japanese Americans were imprisoned during World War II. And a large part of George's life and his childhood was spent, not just in one, but two. And this book is really brilliant in the way that it flashes back and forth between both George's childhood, and it starts off right away with just a knock on the door. Okay, and I'm just gonna, let me see if I can find a good way of showing this to you. So George is sleeping with his little brother, okay, Henry, and he's sleeping, and suddenly Dad comes in. You have to get up. You have to get up. Okay? And that's because he had to answer very loud bangs at the door and soldiers. So, just to do a thought exercise, okay? Um, Understand that for George and Henry, his brother, they were born in the United States. This is their home. His parents ran a laundromat in Los Angeles, um, and his his mother was born in the United States. His father was not. They met. They fell in love. Both are of Japanese descent. Yet this is what happened, a horrific event. And let's be honest, anything that happens in war is going to be horrific. It is war for a reason. But Pearl Harbor happened. And I always say there were really only two fights my grandfather and I ever had. And by fights, I mean disagreements. And one of them had to do with the idea of the concentration camps for Japanese Americans. In California, the west coast of the United States was the one which was targeted the most when it came to this is where many Japanese Americans had settled. What I like about how this is arranged is that George explains not just his emotions, right? And he says, for the most part, as a child, I didn't know what was going on. I didn't see the bigger picture. How he describes his parents, I just have to tell you, I mean, his parents are incredible people because you have very scary things happening. You have somebody coming into your home and knocking on the door, and then you are carrying yourself as you would hope your parent would. We need to pack our things. It's going to be okay. This is what we're doing. Brave, incredible people. And the title says it all. They called us enemy. And for much of this, you see George and Henry act like children. It's an adventure. They don't realize until many years later. And George says this. He does flash forwards, which is really a flash backwards for him writing this, of when he is now in high school and he understands this. And he's like, why didn't you fight? Why didn't you fight? You know, and his father is, I did what I needed to do at the time. And then now, as an older gentleman, George Takei, at his age now, reflecting back and seeing what it was his father did and how he did fight, discover what life was like in this book from George's perspective as a young child. Looking back now as an older gentleman and the conversations he has later as a teenager with his father, there's even this great irony in which he's standing to give a speech in the house of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who created these camps. And he's been invited by descendants of him to stand in this house of the very man who ordered this. The layers upon layers of what it means. And also what it means for George himself to be now a very well-recognized figure, an activist in his own right on many different causes, and not forgetting what it was that his family went through. This is really a brilliant book about not forgetting what does it mean to be an American. What are your constitutional rights? Because we hear a lot of people discuss this, and yet this was something that did happen to Americans. And while we touch upon this in school, okay, do we really touch upon it in school? The real depth of what happened to American citizens, okay? And again, it's well written. It's not a long book, but it isn't one that I flew through because it caused me to really think and question so much. And, you know, my grandfather was a migrant worker during this time. The grandfather I said who I had discussions with and disagreements on when I first studied this. And he worked for Japanese American families. And he told me, as somebody who was from Oklahoma and first came to California during the Great Depression, many people wouldn't hire them. No Okies here, no Okies wanted. Yet, Japanese American farmers did. And he felt quite accepted. He went to school with many people who were Japanese Americans. Yet when this happened, he also talked about the underlying prejudice that ran through and the very real attacks, violent attacks, that it seemed were being condoned after Pearl Harbor by even law enforcement. So it's so strange for me to rectify my grandfather's stories of his lived history and also to read this. Definitely highly recommended, all age groups. And I think that this is what I love about a memoir too, and nonfiction, is that lens, like we talked about with historical fiction too. But this is real. This is someone's actual lived experience. So George Takei, They Called Us Enemy. Gotta read it. Gotta read it. Okay, so the next book I want to talk about, I'm going to switch gears a little bit. This is written for a young adult audience, and it is called Spinning. It's been out for a couple of years. It's by Tillie Walden, and in this case, Tillie not only tells her own memoir, but she also illustrates, colors, does the text, everything. And I just want to give you a sample of what it looks like. What I actually really love is actually the color you can see right here on the front. I'm just going to get a little closer. She uses these lovely shades of lavender and with spotlights of yellow, and very complimentary. And if you look on the inside as well, you'll see that it's a lot of white, a lot of these deep hues of purple, and then here you go. You get to see these like flashes of yellow to highlight things that are happening. And that is it. And then you see the text as well. Very nicely done. Which hold still so you can see it. Okay. Longer memoir. I finished it in a day because I was entranced. I was really entranced by this. And you can tell right off the bat, what is this about? Ballet. Not ballet. Figure skating. It's the second time I've done this. And even on the back, look at this. I love these intricate. I found myself wanting to follow this because she has this a few times, of the loops and where you go. And she has this throughout. And what Tillie writes about, she even says in her note at the end of the book, and there's a cute photograph of her when she's young too, an actual photograph of her ice skating outside the ice skating rink. She says that when people ask her what this book is about, she says ice skating. Yeah, you can say that. But it's about so much more. This is really about Tillie. When she first starts to ice skate, I would say when she's young, okay, elementary school. And we don't catch up with her right away in the beginning, okay? We catch up with her probably around entering junior high. And we follow her through high school. So this period of time. And I would really like to call it, and I hate using that coming of age novel because it's not a novel, but coming of age memoir. But in many ways it is. But it's the framework of it is within the field of figure skating. I don't know anything about figure skating. I'm going to keep it real. I liked watching it. I love watching it. I like seeing it. But I honestly didn't know what it takes. I'm not a sporty person. You can ask my mom. I really wanted to learn how to do gymnastics after Mary Lou Retton and, the 80s. And the Y had like a little thing that you could do. And my sister and I both did it. And it didn't take them long to call my mom and just say, yeah, your daughter can't even walk a straight line, so you can come pick her up. Yeah. Not an athletic bone in my body. And so I do understand the discipline and the dedication that it takes to do something, anything when it comes to sports, even academics. And so it has to be something you really want to do. And so as you follow Tillie along, one of the things that I really like about this book too is it starts off, and let me just show you, with each section. Let me see if I can frame it, okay, with a pose, okay? So this one is the waltz jump. And so she describes, let me see if I can get my big fat hand out of there, okay. So she describes what the jumps are, okay? So here you see what it is, and she does these really great little diagrams of what it might look like, and each one sets you up for what's going to happen in that section. Okay, is it an easy pose? Is it a difficult one? What is it that she has to do? And you learn a little bit about each of the different things that she has to do. Now, she isn't just figure skating on her own. She also is part of synchronized figure skating. And when we start off, one of the very first things that happens is Tillie's family's moving. She has a twin brother. She has an older sibling. And her family, you learn a little about her family life. Her family life isn't the greatest. Hi. Some of us can relate to that. And so you find out that in Tillie's world, the one person that she can really depend upon is her twin. And her twin brother is, he's kind of awesome. He's great. And one of the things that Tillie struggles with is she has some learning disabilities. So even though they're in the same class, they're kind of not in the same class because Tillie has to have homework that's adjusted, classwork that's adjusted. But her brother's there. And you sense that bond immediately, even though Tillie doesn't delve deeply into it. By looking at the pictures, by seeing them interact together, you see this bond. And it's great that she has it. Her parents by no means are monsters. Let's be honest. Any kind of sport is not cheap. And she has to be up at 4 a.m. to leave before school to go to figure skating. So her father is taking her. And so that kind of dedication doesn't mean that someone doesn't love you. But it also doesn't mean that someone's going to be a great parent either, if that makes any sense. So you sense that there's a little bit of distance, a little bit of frustration in the family, a little bit of Tillie feeling like I don't belong. When she's at school, there's a little bit of distance as well with people who are friends. She's not necessarily oh my God, I'm the popular girl. And it's the same thing too with the girls that she works with, when it comes to figure skating. Figure skating is if you're a girl, a very, very feminist, and by a feminist, I shouldn't say feminist, feminine sport. Girls got to wear really short dresses. Everyone's got to wear their hair a certain way for synchronized. You got to have your makeup. Tillie's not really into that, okay? And while she enjoys the sport itself, there's a lot of things about that she just doesn't feel like her. It's just so hard. It's really hard for her to feel like, is this really what I want to do? And the other thing about Tillie too is she knows that she's gay. She's known for a long time, but she doesn't say anything. And where does that fit in the whole kind of figure skating world? Because she enjoys the sport, but she doesn't really want to tell anyone, she doesn't want to come out. She doesn't want to really say anything. But she also feels like I'm keeping secrets from people who I care about. So there's a lot of stuff going on in Tillie's world. And I think that's true for a lot of us. A lot of us have things that we have going on in our world, and we're not necessarily comfortable sharing. I think I've had a lot of friends that are girls who have been in different competitive sports where they have felt that they're treated differently because they are girls in a competitive sport. And I think that there are a lot of questions that she raises about that, about why is it that men in the sport can do this, but a girl doing the same kind of sport has to do this. And I'm not comfortable with that. And how do I handle that? And she isn't necessarily fighting the system, but she's more trying to discover herself and where she's comfortable. And that's something that all of us have to go through at a certain point in our lives. It's really a lovely book of just figuring out who you are and where your comfort is. And like I said, not a sports person, but I felt very drawn to Tillie as an individual and her attempt to just try to fit in and make friends and be okay. And this is a book about feeling okay and understanding that sometimes it's okay not to be okay, or not to like what everybody else likes. Spinning by Tillie Walden. I definitely recommend it. It's really, I just want to thank Tillie for being so open and honest about uh, how she went through different things as a young person. So the last book that I have to share with you, I would say is probably written for adults. I don't know if it was necessarily written with a specific age group in mind, but because of the content, I'm going to say there is some violent, horrific content in this. But I do think that mature young adults can handle it. Um, I am so glad that I read this book, and without further ado, I'm just going to introduce it. I was looking forward to this book coming out, and I am glad that I read it. Um, Big Black Stand at Attica. Um, and this is one of those books where it's not necessarily just written by a memoir that's written by the individual. Frank Big Black Smith, he's known as Big Black. His name's Frank Smith. And this is his memoir. It was told by Jared Reinmuth, and it was illustrated by, um, um, pardon me if I get your if I get your name wrong because I worked on this, Ameziane, and this really covers 4 days. 4 days, and you can see 4 days in 1971 that changed the course of America history. Attica is a prison in New York, and it's known as one of the worst prisons as far as how people were treated. And I'm just gonna go ahead and put it out there, whether people like it or not. But it was predominantly filled with people of color. And in 1971, there was a prison revolt. Um, I won't go into detail since it's in the book. Um, but let me first tell you about Big Black. Okay. And I'm trying to think. I think there's a photograph of him in here. I just, I have to tell you right now, this man, I just, if it's possible to love somebody you have never met, yes, this man is an incredible man. And that's how I felt. And I know there's a photograph in here of him somewhere, and I probably should have marked it before I started doing a book talk, and I didn't. But this is actually a very good likeness of him in graphic form. He was a huge man, and it talks a little bit about his life, so you know who he is, how he ended up in prison, and it was a petty theft, a crime. And he, along with a friend, ended up in prison. It does admit that, by the way, just so you know who Jared is, Jared's father was one of the attorneys that represented Big Black, and along with some of the other prisoners. And he became friends with the family. I wanted to make sure that this was something that the family was okay with, because by the time this actually became published, Frank Big Black Smith had passed away from cancer, and his wife supported the telling of this. She read this, and his family supports this. So I just wanted to make sure that people knew that this was something that is supported by the family. So Jared and his family were very close to Frank Smith's family. So let me just get that out of the way, because I'm not a big supporter of other people who tell someone else's story without, especially something like this, without permission. So Frank ends up in jail. But he was a star football player. He had a lot of things going for him. But as a black man too, he also had some things that were stacked against him. So he's in Attica, but he is kind of a role model prisoner. He is he coaches their football team. As I said, he played football. Big, huge man. And they do mention in the book how big he is. Many of the prison guards liked him. He was the kind of person that kept the peace. There were lots of different groups in the prison. So people kind of formed their own groups for protection. Big Black was not a part of any of the groups. And but they had like the Black Muslims. They mentioned as one of the groups. They had certain ones that were part of gangs. He was not a part of any of them, but he mingled amongst them because so many of them wanted to play football. So they were on his team. And they would tell the other people that they were groups with, nah, man, he's cool. He's cool. And many of them would come and watch, and they liked him. He was a nice man. Because he was a big man, he could take care of himself. Nobody ever started any trouble with him. The prison guards liked him for that very reason. He was polite. He was respectful. People didn't cause problems when he was around. He, as the football coach, he kept things in line, but also it was a good exercise for the inmates. So he was somebody that was admired and respected on both sides of the law in the prison. So when the riot broke out, and it describes how the riot broke out, and it was just one small thing led to another. So when that breaks out, Big Black is actually working in the laundry room with another inmate and a friend of his and one of the guards, and they can hear it. And he ends up getting drafted to help be security because they don't want people to get hurt. They want to use the guards that they have as leverage to have these practical proposals of enacted. Now, at the time, the governor of New York was Rockefeller, a very wealthy man. You've probably heard of the name if you don't know much about him. Long line of money. And at the time, the president of the United States was Nixon. No way were they going to allow these prisoners to have their say. So the Black Muslims were kind of behind organizing, trying to get some things done because they were being mistreated. And they were, there's no doubt about it, being mistreated. They asked Big Black if he would help protect the guards from other people. Well, Frank didn't want anything to do with that. But then he realized if he didn't step in, these people were going to get killed. The prison guards were going to get killed. So he reluctantly agreed. So even though he wasn't part of any of these groups, he stepped in. What this book is about is what happens during those 4 days when there's a standoff. What the governor does, his connections to Nixon, what happens inside the prison, some famous personalities of the time. We're talking some very famous Black leaders of the time who come in and try to broker peace, and how ultimately it fails. And what kind of retaliation is wrought upon people, especially this man. This man who fought for peace and tried so hard to save lives on both sides. It is and I'm not gonna lie, there are some very violent moments in this book, but it makes you question the truth. Remember, I told you history is a lot about perspective, right? What happens in prison? Okay, what happens in our prison system, and how are people treated? Now, I know a lot of people will say, well, if you're in prison, well, you deserve to be there. Look at Big Black's story. One of the things that Reinmuth talks about, Jared Reinmuth, when his father looked at his case, is the amount of time that he was given for the act that he did was more time than anyone should have been given, and he was sent to Attica, which was a prison that normally judges would not have sent an individual for doing that kind of crime. Why was that? Was it because he's Black? I don't know. But I think that there are questions that people should ask. And when you look at the character of this individual, what he goes on to do when he is released, he goes to helping people in his life. So this focuses primarily on those 4 days, but you do get to find out a little bit more about Big Black before and after. Um, I gotta be honest with you, this man is amazing. He is amazing, and I'm glad that I read this. I'm shocked and horrified I didn't know more about what happened at Attica. Things like this happening within the United States. I mean, I think it's important that we know about these parts of history. And it's harsh, but I also think that there's a need to see both sides of the things that happen. So I definitely recommend Frank Big Black Smith's Big Black Stand at Attica. For years, he wanted his story told, and Jared finally found the right format in a graphic format. Um, but check it out. Like I said, it's not for the faint of heart. But that's the last memoir that I have to present. And whether you choose to read memoirs in graphic format or in print, like regular text, is up to you. But I think memoirs, just like historical fiction, which we just shared, have a powerful way of letting you know about a certain point in history or certain experiences that help people grow that we may have in common. And remember, your story is important. I always share that because I feel it's true. And my grandfather loved history, the one that I said I almost had an argument with when we talked about Japanese American concentration camps. But he was the reason I loved history, and he's the reason I love nonfiction. And he always taught me it's important to understand perspective. So keep sharing your story, and until next time, keep reading. Thank you.